Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today for today's ToddTalk Leadership Podcast. I'm Todd Marshall Hearnsberger, the host of this podcast and also the founder and CEO of Lead Well Solutions. And today I have a very special guest, a new friend of mine that I want to introduce to you. And I'm so excited for you to hear what he has to teach us today because I want to learn from him as well. But his name is Dr. John Murray Jr. And so let me give you a proper introduction. But Dr. John Murray Jr. is the executive director of the Center of Excellence for Legal Studies and Public Service Programs at Alvin College, as well as a leadership consultant, executive coach, keynote speaker, attorney, and former U.S. Attorney JAG officer, which, by the way, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
He helps leaders navigate communication, conflict, and organizational change, working with executives, leadership teams, colleges, corporations, and law enforcement agencies to build healthier cultures and more effective leaders. Dr. John holds a doctorate degree with honors in law and also has a degree in dispute resolution from Pepperdine University. You are also certified in change management, and you have taught more than 60 college courses in law and leadership. You're also the award-winning author of multiple books, including the books titled Better Than Our Dogs. That is an interesting title. Manna and the Stop, Drop, and Roll Method. Known for combining practical leadership strategies with timeless biblical principles, John believes the greatest leadership breakthroughs often begin with the courage to address conflict well. That's a mouthful, but I'm so glad I introduced you. I like for people to know who they're learning from. So welcome, Dr. John. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
So you obviously specialize in conflict management, change management, communication. I've been exposed to all of these topics in my academic learnings, but there are some people that may have heard of these topics. They may not understand what those are, what they mean, like what is conflict management, conflict resolution, and all the above, and all the subsets of topics that go with that. Why don't you give us just a quick 30,000 view of what your expertise in and why you gravitate to this as being your expertise?
Well, early in my career when I was an attorney, I was in the middle of fires every day, going to court, and I was a litigation attorney. So I was in court arguing cases every day. I was in the middle of conflicts between two people, but by the time I was involved in it, it was a little too late. It was reactive. It was trying to settle the case in court, and people were spending a whole lot of money and time and emotion trying to end a relationship or end a business dispute. Conflict resolution to me is how can we get in front of that where it doesn't have to get to court? How can we, as people, learn better communication skills and better strategies to not make it get to the point where now you are paying thousands of dollars in litigation fees to do something that you could have stopped before it ever got to that point. So what I like to do is I like to get into businesses and into colleges and companies and people, one-on-one communication to help them understand there is a better way to do this. In business, a lot of times we talk about culture and how do you build culture? Well, part of that is you don't have employees and you don't have business owners and leaders going to work every day saying, I got to put out a fire. I got to put out a fire. I got to put out a fire. If we could get ahead of that and have work become something that it was designed to be, which is give you purpose, not beat you down, now we're on the right track.
So obviously communication goes hand in hand with conflict resolution, effective communication. And there's unhealthy communication and there's also healthy ways to communicate, especially trying to resolve disputes of various kinds within an organization. And every organization has disputes. There's not a perfect organization out there because anytime people are involved, there will always be problems and conflicts and that needs to be resolved. On the communication part, do you have any tips or tricks or strategies on how to effectively navigate the communication part of resolving conflicts within an organization?
My strategy is I created the stop, drop, and roll method of conflict resolution. And I think it's memorable, it's catchy, it's an easy way for people to have something in their pocket. Because again, like I just said, what people always say when they're in a conflict, they're in a fire. How do we put out a fire? We're taught as from a very young age, you stop, drop, and roll.
Mhm.
So if they could just apply that to the conflict in their organization or on an interpersonal level, what it does is it says you need to stop. You need to be present. You need to slow everything down. You're not distracted by an email. You're not distracted by your phone or a text message. You stop and slow everything down. You give people your presence and they give you their presence. And you start to build rapport and empathy and humbleness. But the drop piece is humbleness. It's that as a leader, I need to lower myself. I need to realize that I don't know everything about what this conflict is, or even if it doesn't even apply to me, what conflict is the person bringing to me? I need to lower myself to realize I don't understand everything that's going on here. I need to discover it. I need to find out what's happening. I need to treat this conflict as something that's happening between people and not just something to give my opinion on. But eventually, after you've done the stop and you've done the drop, and I teach all of the active listening skills and all of the different communication skills that are a part of that, eventually a leader's got to roll. They got to make a decision. They got to move on. But that role is educated. It's an educated response. It's not a reaction that a lot of leaders want to give on the front end.
Mhm.
And that helps to deal with the conflict.
Whenever we talk about communication, a leader who we're as leaders, we're called to help bring resolve to issues, whether they're big or small fires, it doesn't matter. We're called as leaders to bring resolution to issues. At what point is it unhealthy for a leader to come in to try to resolve an issue or a conflict, and their strategy is so backwards, so harsh? Maybe they don't hear both sides effectively, they don't hear both sides equally, or and all the above. What would you say to a leader who has an unhealthy strategy in
Yeah.
trying to deal with conflict? Because there is a healthy way. You've mentioned a stop, drop, and roll method, but there are unhealthy ways that leaders resolve conflict. Elaborate on this topic of the unhealthy side of
Yeah.
conflict management.
Well, I think that conflict resolution is about relationships. And for a leader who isn't going to dip into the weeds to develop relationships, they are going to have a harder time trying to resolve conflicts. So for that leader who is coming and saying like, well, this is just my strategy. This is my leadership profile. I'm very decisive. I'm very authoritative. What you're basically telling me, I developed an A formation of leadership. And that A formation is on this side, we have how do you make people feel individually as under your leadership? Do you make them feel heard, understood, and valued? And that's the experience felt. On this side, if the leader is saying, individuals, every individual is different, I'm going to run it how I want. Well, any leader in a whole, on the macro level, is going to want to have a good culture in their organization. So this side of the A formation is culture. How do you build culture? Well, you build culture by respect, by trust, by rapport, by vulnerability, and then vulnerability ends in collaboration. So if a leader is struggling, I'm going to try to identify where they are on my A formation and say, there's a reason why people over here don't like you as a leader. And there's a reason why the organization over here is struggling with culture. And it's because people don't trust you. You don't make them feel seen or heard. And then we start to work on those skills together.
That's very interesting in the fact that I know culture plays such a valuable role in conflict. And like you said, the rapport, the trust, the respect, the relationships. I know I've dealt with conflict before, and my goal as a leader was to have both parties ending, or maybe multiple parties, but two parties for the sake of this conversation, to where we all win. Everybody wins. And my philosophy, and I'd like to know your perspective on this. My philosophy in trying to resolve issues between department heads or between two individuals or whatever it may be is to allow both parties to speak and share their voice, share their side, their experience, but also me help coach them through the process of them resolving the issues between themselves and me being more of a mediator rather than someone coming in and just making a decision saying, you're right, you're wrong, go deal with it, goodbye, get out of my office. Is that a strategy that you see as a healthier way to manage conflict than the decisive leader who says, you're right, you're wrong, go ahead and move on and get your work done?
There's a reason why you run this podcast. You put your finger on a bunch of key skills there. And as you were speaking, I was going to say, well, that sounds like a mediator because that's what a mediator does. They sit in the room between two people, and as opposed to a judge in a courtroom who's going to decide right and wrong, or an arbitrator in arbitration who's going to make a decision in the case, a mediator is trying to find common ground. And how can we get past this together? And a lot of times mediation is voluntary. The mediator is only as good as the people who are participating. So yes, I would say that that is a very good strategy. And if I put it into other words, what I would say in the conflict theory realm is too often people in a conflict, they think it's about scientific truth. Who's right and who's wrong? What can I prove to make the other person wrong? What can I prove to make myself right? But a lot of conflicts are about emotional truth. They're about perception and what that person sees through their lens.
Mhm.
And no matter of right and wrong is going to change their lens because that's the way they filtered the information through their experience, through their education, through the walk that they've walked. So mediation a lot of times is our only way, unless you're going to be very directive and say, you go over there, you go over there. I don't want you guys talking to each other. But that's not something that's actually going to solve the conflict. That's just going to separate the two people.
It's kind of like a band-aid.
Yeah.
What do you do with a person where you're bringing conflict resolution and one person is willing to meet halfway and the other person is just not willing to meet halfway? They think they're right. As you said, their perspective is their truth. And believe me, there are some people out there that are what I call right fighters. They believe their truth is the only truth, and they're not going to sway from that because, by golly, I know the truth and I'm not going to sway and I'm not going to meet halfway and bring down myself to that level. Do you have any pointers or tricks or tips that we deal with what I call hard-headed people that you're trying to bring resolution in a conflict?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of different tricks. I wouldn't say tricks, but methods, techniques to try to help that person. One is, I think, are we actually actively listening to what they're saying? Can we identify the interests that they have and the position that they have? I learned from a great conflict resolution professor at Pepperdine. And what he said is that every conflict has three pieces. You have the accusation, Bob is lazy. You have the emotional piece of it, that he makes me so angry. And then you have the request. If only Bob would put his underwear in the laundry basket, I wouldn't be as angry. So in conflict resolution, I'm not going to I'm going to try to take Bob out of the villain out of it as much as possible. I know what their accusation is that Bob, but I'm not going to get into whether or not Bob is lazy because that's proving the truth of it or not. And I'm not going to sit on the emotion very long. I understand the emotion, I've heard the emotion, but too often in conflict, we get in this tornado of we get stuck in the emotion and trying to prove the emotion. I'm going to focus on what is your request. And if I could just get Bob to put his boxers in the laundry basket, now we have a breakthrough with the conflict. So sometimes for that person that's stuck, I want to get off of the emotion and I want to get off of the accusation. What's your request? And a lot of times that request, there's something in that request where we can meet somewhere along the line.
So, in my organization that I run, the Leadwell Solutions, I am obviously a faith-based business. I know you are also a faith-based business, as we had mentioned when I introduced you. How do faith and leadership or intersect in the way that you teach people to handle tension and disagreement? How do you bring God into this a scenario
Yeah.
of conflict resolution?
Yeah. Well, he's running all through my theories on how to resolve conflict. Even when people don't know it, he's there because my verse is Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. If you look at my A formation and my stop, drop, and roll, be humble, do justice, but love mercy. And with conflict resolution, if we could just master those three things, boy, we're good. The stop, drop, and roll method I created, it comes from John 8, a story where Jesus had just sat down to teach, and he's approached by an angry mob to resolve a conflict. And what Jesus does is he stops teaching, he lowers himself, he brings all the eyes on him as a humble person who's listening, and the mob keeps on poking Jesus and saying, "We want an answer, we want an answer." And eventually Jesus rolls and gives them the answer, but it's not the answer they were hoping for or wanted. But Jesus had taken it all in. So even within my methodology, I have theory and my faith wrapped into it. For those that are faith-based that I help, it resonates. For those that are not faith-based, they never even know it, but they can agree to the principles, and the
Yeah.
principles are something that resonates with their heart.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mostly focus my marketing to Christian organizations because I do bring the word of God. I bring biblical principles into the scenario, and so it's easy for me to talk biblical language with Christian leaders and Christian organizations. But there are a few organizations that reach out to me that have no faith-based foundation at all. And as you said, I may not share in detail the faith-based part of my program, but the principles still are relatable to them without even having to mention that these are biblical principles. So I certainly understand that dynamic. But how do you help leaders move from reacting emotionally, which you talked about just a moment ago, to responding more with wisdom and self-control? And you may have touched on this, but I want to kind of go back and dig a little bit deeper on this because some people are very reactionary emotionally
Yeah,
and they don't use wisdom or common sense, or they just let their emotions take control of a conflict and they don't think logically.
yeah,
How does that work? Maybe do a little bit more of a deep dive on that part there.
sure. A couple of things that come to my mind. One is that's part of the reason why stop is the first step in the stop, drop, and roll method. But I always remember a story that I heard, and it was on a Malcolm Gladwell podcast, Revisionist History. And he was interviewing a priest, and the priest was telling a story about St. Ignatius. And St. Ignatius, when he had his missionaries and they would go into a new area, the missionaries always wanted to go into the new area and they wanted to preach. They wanted to spread their word. They wanted to get on the pedestal and spread the word to everyone else. And St. Ignatius said, stop. Before you ever think about giving your version, before you ever preach, you need to walk with the most marginalized in this area and learn from them. You need to walk a mile in their shoes. Because if you don't do that, All you could offer someone are platitudes. Oh, you're great. Thanks. You're the best. Or outrage. How dare you? What are you thinking? You can never offer true consolation. And the metric for a great leader is, are you willing to walk with the people that you're leading? If you're not, you are getting up on your pedestal and preaching. And if anger is what controls you, or just reaction is what controls you, that's a sign of your leadership. It's not a sign of what the person is bringing to you, because you have no idea what the person is actually bringing to you because you haven't spent the time to figure it out. So from there, I think now it's a growing learning lesson for the leader to say, do you want to be a better leader? And it's kind of like Jesus with the man at the well. Do you want to get well? It's a question to you. If you say no, then I've got nothing I can do to help you. If you say yes, let's work on it.
What happens when within an organization there's what we call troublemakers and they just stir up conflict? They find conflict, they create conflict. It is an ongoing problem no matter how many times you as the leader try to work with them, deal with them, coach them, mentor them, whatever you try to do to help them stop doing these bad habits of creating problems all the time. What advice would you have for that leader that has that one or two people in their team that just is not willing to learn from anything and they're always troublemakers and starting fires?
Yeah, I mean this is the other end of the spectrum. And do I get tested on that exact question? Oh, Murray, your method is soft. I mean, work with people and give everybody a second chance, and everybody's kumbaya. As long as we understand people, we'll be fine. I'm realistic. I've led a lot of people in my career, and my analogy would be occasionally there's a moldy strawberry in the carton.
Mhm.
And
Good.
if I go to the supermarket and I see a carton with perfect strawberries and one with a moldy strawberry, I'm going to buy the perfect strawberry carton. Ideally, hopefully we could get to that point with the team. But occasionally there's a moldy strawberry, and I'm not going to buy that carton. And the moldy strawberry is not going to become unmoldy.
Mhm.
So if I take for true what you just said, they worked with them, they counseled them, they coached them, they know who they are, they tried everything they could, and the person is still a moldy strawberry. A leader has to roll. And that role isn't always, I'm giving you another chance. I've given you as many chances as I can. And I think that that is still biblical. If we go back to Micah, do justice,
Mhm.
love mercy, but do justice.
Mhm.
Walk humbly, be humble in what you're doing. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, but do justice. And sometimes justice is there's nothing else I could do for you.
I've always heard a saying for years, and it says, and it may be kind of harsh to hear, but the phrase is this: rule with an iron hand, but wear a velvet glove. You ever heard of that?
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So, I do agree in the leadership side of problem makers, and there's never a resolve that sometimes, as you said, it's better for them to move on somewhere else and get that rotten strawberry out of the box of your great strawberries and not allow them to cause problems anymore. And sometimes that time of separation is needed after multiple attempts to get that person to cooperate and kind of meet in the middle on some things. So I certainly understand that dynamic, that's the extreme end of the spectrum of having to keep your team culture
Yeah.
healthy, because those bad eggs or bad strawberries in your analogy can really mess up the culture that you're creating for your team.
Yeah.
And one person, all it takes is one person to do that, right?
Right.
One person can mess up a team culture. And my philosophy when I coach and consult with organizations is I hit hard on the subject of team culture. And that's also to create a team culture is making sure that you have the right people on the bus and you also have the right people who are on the bus in the right seats, making sure they're operating in their skill sets. And I have found over time of working, I've been leading teams of people since I was 19 years old and I'm now 56. And so I've found that if I put people on, get the right people on the bus first, and the second thing is make sure they're in the right seats, operating in their own skill sets that they are gifted in, conflict is minimized greatly and culture is increased greatly. Would
Yeah.
that be a good theory?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And, I think one person can take down the culture, just like the moldy strawberry in the carton takes down the carton. And I think the longer you let the moldy strawberry sit in the carton, now it starts to make other strawberries moldy. Now you don't just have a one moldy carton, you got multiple. And if you dissect that, the reason why in my A formation is because now the leader has started to lose respect of the people. They started to lose the trust of the people. People don't, if you don't trust me, you're not going to be vulnerable with me. And it just falls apart step by step by step until now you say, why is my culture so bad? Well, let's identify that. So I agree with that kind of analysis and how it can be a slippery slope down the path of culture.
Do you ever feel like that there are some people who, this doesn't really have to do with conflict management per se or resolution, but I want your thought on this since you're in the leadership world. Have you ever come across or have experienced people who are in leadership roles? They've been promoted, they've been given a leadership role, but they really aren't great leaders at all. They shouldn't be even operating as a leader, or they need proper training before giving them a leadership responsibility. And that may play into conflict in some way. What's your take on that
Yeah,
perspective?
absolutely. I mean, I think that the more you study these days, a new kind of branch of leadership pipeline theory. What we see is that a lot of leaders get promoted based on skill, technical skill. They're very good at whatever their job is, so you want to reward them and you move them up the company. But really, technical skill isn't a good determinant of can I lead people? Because as you move up and now you have people that you need to lead, you might not have any experience leading people. In fact, somebody else in the office is better at leading people than you are. You were just better at your technical area. So what leadership pipeline theory a lot of times shows is that the person who is very successful, the best salesperson gets promoted up, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't like all this people stuff. They just so they try to fix that by still being the great salesman. I don't need you to be a salesman anymore. I need you to be the leader of the salespeople.
Hmm.
So that is where a lot of places run into problems is they promote based on past success and skill in a position and loyalty and reward it, but they're not looking for what the next position actually, what is the skill set that the next position actually needs. I need somebody, if I'm going to manage people, to be able to manage people. The same thing happens to founders of companies. They're very good at starting a company. They're a one person show. They start their company. It's wildly successful. They add a couple more people on, a couple more people on. And now all of a sudden they're like, I don't want to deal with all these people issues. Like, I just want to run my company. I just want to go back to making widgets. And that is where they run into problems. It's the same thing over and over again.
So I'm in my writing my second book. I'm about 95% done with my second book. And for those of you who are want to know what it is, it's called The Functional Leader, because I already wrote a book already that's published called The Dysfunctional Leader. And the functional leader focuses on the subtitle is Foundational Principles That Every Leader Must Master. And I have found through my experience of leading teams and studying on the subject of leadership that there are a lot of people who have leadership titles. They have never learned what I call leadership 101 principles, like the foundational principles of what makes a leader a great leader. Someone can go from being a regular employee or team member and be promoted to a leadership level role where they're leading teams, but they've never learned what is a true leader. What are the foundational principles, such as character, integrity, trust, effective communication, all the above, which I write about all of this in my second book that I'm currently writing. And I even have a whole chapter dedicated to conflict resolution and management. What would you say to someone who is an upcoming leader? Maybe they just stepped into a leadership role. Maybe they're going to be promoted and they're kind of green in the leadership role, and they're going to have to manage conflict sometime. What method or strategy would you give them as a newbie of leadership that would say, hey, here's some basic foundational principles of conflict management?
Well, here's another, it's interesting. I'm also writing another book, and it's called The Leader's Mirror. So the leader is looking in the mirror and
I
seeing
love
what
it.
reflects back.
Love it.
Um, but one of my key themes, and that is exactly to your question. And I remember when I graduated from law school and I passed the bar exam, when I was at the ceremony for the bar, there was a keynote speaker, and the keynote speaker said, your career will be defined on how you arrange four letters: ELIF. You could either arrange those four letters and they spell file, or you could arrange those four letters and they spell life.
Hmm,
Your career will be defined on how you arrange those four letters.
hmm,
And for me, leadership is the same way. If you are going to treat the people under your charge as a file, you are going to struggle as a leader. Not, you might be wildly successful. You might have a booming business that's making a lot of money in the short term. But as a leader, as a great leader, you're going to struggle. If you arrange those four letters as life, you are going to set the stage to be a great leader. And then a lot of those other characteristics that you're talking about start to fall into place.
hmm.
Do you have, respect and trust and all of these other elements of what it takes to be a great leader and build a great culture? But first, you have to treat people as people, and you have to be willing to sit in silence at times and walk with them at times and be patient at times and listen and actually remember what the people say. That's a leader.
I totally agree with that. So, as we close out our podcast, I want you to put a bow on this and just kind of give any final thoughts, final summary. I know 30 minutes of this podcast is not near enough time to share on the depth of conflict resolution. I mean, we really did just see the tip of the iceberg in this subject matter, and there's a whole science behind conflict resolution and management. Kind of close us out here with any final thoughts or some things that maybe you haven't shared yet. Maybe I didn't ask a question in a certain direction that you just have a passion about. Kind of put the bow on this conversation today with sharing some other things to close us out today.
One thing that's always resonated with me, again, another professor at Pepperdine when I was going through their program, I'll never forget this picture. And the picture was that every conflict takes on the nature of a fairy tale. And if the person across from you is talking about a conflict, again, instead of looking at it as scientific truth, you should be saying in your mind, once upon a time. Once upon a time, as what they're telling you, because they're telling you the story as they've seen it, as it's unfolded to them. And what that story is always going to have is it's called the princess story. There's always going to be a princess. That's the person who's telling you their version of the conflict.
Mhm.
The princess is always has a villain. They're going to be pointing the finger at somebody, and they're coming to you as the hero, and they want you to validate them in some way. But if you turn that triangle around and you went to the villain and you said, "All right, now tell me your side." Now the villain will turn into the princess, and the princess will turn into the villain, and you're still the hero. So with conflict resolution, if you can, instead of taking it personally, instead of reacting right away, if you can understand as the person is having their story unfold in front of you and say, once upon a time, and work this triangle, now you have a better understanding of how to resolve it.
So good, so good. I know we can go more and more into depth of this, and I probably want to have you back. I want to talk about some of your other books. So I invite you back for some other podcasts to be interviewed because you have a
Sure.
wealth of knowledge that we all need to learn. And I want to thank you, Dr. John Murray, for being on my podcast today. So grateful that you have joined us today.
Thanks for the invite, Todd. I enjoyed it.
Dr. John, so tell everyone how everybody can get a hold of you. I know you do keynote speaking, you have books that you've written. How can people reach out to you and connect with you?
Well, my email address is John J. Murray Jr. 1, the number one,
Okay.
at gmail.com. My website is johnjmurrayjr.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. You could find me just under my name, and I post a lot of things on there generally on a daily basis, and you could kind of follow what I'm posting and where I'm going and who I'm talking to and just cool leadership ideas.
All right, great. Well, I encourage each of you to get a hold of him, get a hold of his books. If you have an organization, it would be great to bring him in to speak to your team and help give them information and knowledge and educate them on this subject matter. So again, everybody reach out to Dr. John. He'll be a valuable asset to your organization. So, for those of you who want to know more about me and my organization, again, my organization is called Lead Well Solutions, and I am the author of The Dysfunctional Leader, which is out and published now. You can buy it on Amazon or you can go on my website, which is at leadwellsolutions.us, and you can also find out all about the services that I offer. I'm in the process, as I said, mentioned, of writing my second book called The Functional Leader that will be published here very soon. And so if you want more information, just reach out to me again at leadwellsolutions.us. So everyone go out there and do the right thing and lead well.